Hello, and welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast with your host, Peak Performance Coach, Brian Bosley. Are you stuck on the hamster wheel of life, spinning and spinning, but not really moving forward? Are you ready to jump off and soar? Are you finally ready to sculpt your life? If so, you've landed in the right place. This podcast is created and broadcast just for you. All of you strivers, thrivers, and survivors out there. If you'd like to learn more about Brian and the Bamboo Lab, feel free to reach out to explore your true peak level at www.bamboolab3.com.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Bamboo Lab podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Bosley, and this is, I believe, episode number 80. So we're pretty excited to have this amazing guy on. I think you're going to love our guest today, and we're going to do a little different format today because our guest is an amazing storyteller. So I kind of bypassed my standard questions, and we're just going to let Paul, who I'll introduce in a minute, to run with it, and we'll guide each other through the journey a little bit. But before we do, I want to read a letter that came in. Actually, this came in through the Facebook, a Facebook post. I posted last week's podcast episode, which was number 79, with Janice Godleski, and the title was Sobriety is True Freedom. And Janice is a sobriety coach and consultant and does some amazing work out of her office in Florida. And this listener happened to see the post, and she wrote, "I am new to this after several failed attempts," and I'm assuming trying to become sober. She said, "I'm new to this, so after several failed attempts, I am determined this time. It seems all these little signs, including this post here, help me realize that I am not alone on this rough road. Thank you." I just want to say to that Bamboo Pack member and that listener, number one, you've got a lot of courage. You are definitely not alone. You have a lot of people who love you and supporting you on the journey, who care about you. Please continue to reach out. Reach out to the Sober Circle on Facebook, which is Janice's creation. Reach out to Janice herself. Her information is in the show notes of last week's episode. And Godspeed on your journey. You got this time. Okay, I want to welcome two new countries that joined us this week. We have now subscribers in both the countries of Vietnam and Israel. Those are countries number 51 and 52 to join the Bamboo Lab podcast. So thank you for joining. And please, listeners in those two countries, reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to hear if you have any specific episodes, topics, or questions you'd like us to put on the podcast. And I'd love to entertain the thought. So please reach out. All right, let's get down to brass tacks here. Today, we have a very amazing guest. I think you're going to find this guy incredibly wise and also fun. I've known Paul Latham now for about 2 years. We've done a little work together in the past, and just have a great deal of respect for him. He's the kind of person, he's a genuine and man full of integrity, but also a lot of success so far. He's got a bread trail of success behind him and a huge bunch of success coming forward. So anyway, Paul is a serial entrepreneur who qualified as a chartered accountant with Crossley and Davis, which eventually became Lathams Chartered Accountants. He became a partner in 86 and head of business services in 1993. While he was at Lathams, Paul started to develop the business planning process, which is today at the core of the HaydenRock System. These processes they're really developed to help the aim of helping businesses to owners to clarify their direction and maximize their business potential. When Lathams was sold to the Tenon Group Plc in 2001, Paul became the national head of business planning at Tenon. Paul left Tenon to become finance director at Debt Free Direct Group Plc, where he was a founding director and helped to take the business public. That's a big deal, folks. DFD rapidly grew to become the market leader in debt advice in the UK. Paul immigrated over here to this side of the pond of the United States in 2011 and has developed several businesses interests, including being a founding member of the HaydenRock Solutions and Elite Mastermind, which today is all incorporated as Elite Resource Team. And all of you probably remember episode number 72 with Anton Anderson. He's also one of the top dogs over at Elite Resource Team. So if you haven't listened to that episode, scroll back to episode 72. But now we have another guest on today, and we have Paul Latham, as I said. Paul, my friend, welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Hello, Brian, and thanks very much for inviting me on. Hello to all your listeners. I'm very honoured, by the way, to be, I think you said your 80th.
80th, yeah.
And was it 52 or 53 countries? That's amazing.
52 countries now, yeah. We were at 50 last week, and then I looked on Sunday morning, and we had 2 new subscribers in two new countries.
That's fantastic.
It's a blessing. It's a blessing. All right, so Paul, folks, I think I shared this earlier. We're gonna run a little differently today. So I'm gonna start off with one simple question, and we're gonna get to know a little bit about Paul, but then we're gonna go into Paul's stories and his journey and his successes and the wisdom and experiences he's had. So, Paul, can you start off with telling us a little bit about yourself, maybe your childhood, growing up, whatever you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I had a pretty uneventful childhood, if the truth be known. I was born in 1958, so I'm almost 65, which is really seriously worrying. But, my parents were basically working class. By the way, I should say, I'm English. You can probably tell that because I speak funny. So I was born in England, in the Midlands in England, very traditional working class family. My dad sold basically electrical goods. My mum was mainly at home when I was growing up. But prior to that, I think she'd worked on a switchboard in a hospital. You know, those old switchboards where they stick the all the different cables in and so on.
Answer the phone type thing.
It was basically strong working class, and all those good ethics that I think from those days anyway, working class families imbued in their kids. And I had a brother who, was 4 years younger than me, and we fought all the time. But really, essentially, it was a pretty straightforward upbringing. I don't know whether you want me to go into any more detail than that, but pretty normal, pretty straightforward, I think. I think the main thing was the values that my parents imbued in me, really.
Well, that's what I said in the introduction. And that's one thing I've gotten to know about you or in talking to you. We've never met face to face, but we've talked several times on the phone over the last couple of years. You have a lot of integrity. It just comes through so often. And you can pick up on certain people's integrity. Not always, but with you, I always knew that you had those values, that work ethic, obviously stemming from a strong working class family. So,
yeah, exactly. But funny enough, you just remind me, because we're jumping ahead a little in time. But when I first met my first wife, I've been divorced a couple of times. I'm not very good at that, by the way. but when I first met the parents of my first wife, they basically didn't like me very much. And I remember the dad saying to me, "The trouble with you, Paul, is you have no religious or moral basis to your life." And I took exception to half of that statement, because I agreed with him that I wasn't terribly religious. And certainly didn't belong to his team, as it were. But I did take some exception to the lack of moral basis. I remember being a bit indignant. Funnily enough, the reason they met me was because I decided, we were going to live together with his daughter. And we'd got engaged, really to placate them. The fact that we weren't married, and but we had, I'd met them this time. They weren't impressed. We had this bit of a falling out, and I remember rather spectacularly at the end of that sort of first meeting saying, "Well, I'm obviously not welcome in your house, so I'm going, and I'm taking your daughter with me," which was a pretty dramatic statement. Somewhat made less dramatic when I realised it was quite late on a Sunday night. And the last train had long gone. I definitely didn't have the money for the train. So having said, I'm obviously not welcome in your house, and I'm taking your daughter with me, I then added after a pause, tomorrow. Yeah.
Quite not the dramatic exit you wanted to make.
Not quite. But that you make the point about the moral basis, and actually that is definitely the thread that my parents put into me. And remains to this day.
Yeah, I like that. By the way, folks, Paul is calling us from Rhode Island. He lives on the beach, I believe, right, Paul, in Rhode Island?
I do, and it's a beautiful day. It's bright blue sky, no clouds, sunshine. Feels like spring.
It does, finally.
An amazing place to live, and very blessed to live here, certainly.
I was out in Rhode Island, oh my goodness, probably 12 years ago. I was in Boston working, and the vice president of the company I was doing some speaking for, he and I took a day and we went to Rhode Island, we went to, I think, Vermont. I can't remember it all, but I remember going through Rhode Island. It's the only time I'd been there that one time.
It's a nice place. It's a really nice place. I mean, as the names, number one, it's not an island, but everything is close to the water. And it's one of those places where people tend to live, but not necessarily work, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And it's, maybe talk a bit more about it later, but the reason that it attracted me in the first place. When I was first looking to move to the States, I was sort of looking around the Boston area, and then I happened to see this Rhode Island, and I read a bit about it, and it was, founded because it wanted to be a place of tolerance. What you had, the original settlers, on the whole, were persecuted religious people who had been persecuted, back in the UK or wherever, and came here and then promptly started persecuting people who didn't believe in their particular one. And so Rhode Island was actually set up as a place that was free from this persecution, and everyone tolerated everybody. And that sounded to me like a really excellent place to live. So, and to this day, I think some of that character remains. So, good place.
And everybody, by the way, you'll probably learn this, but Paul is a huge football fan, and I'm talking football, but soccer. We call it soccer over here, but a huge soccer fan. And I know I have a lot of friends and family and a lot of listeners who also are following soccer now in the last 10, 12 years. So you can't get a bigger fan from what I've learned than Paul.
One of my, before I left the UK to come here, I know I went to well over 1,000 live soccer games, mainly following my team, which is a really terrible team called Wolverhampton Wanderers, and not having a very good season this season. But one of my prerequisites to move here was I did establish I could still watch it on the television. So, every time Wolves are playing, I'll definitely be watching.
Good. You told me it's the most viewed sporting event in the world.
Well, I was saying, obviously Americans, Super Bowl was a great event. fantastic. But, honestly, 150 million people watch it, which is sort of not a big deal. The World Cup happens every 4 years. And I don't know the precise viewing figures, but I do know they're well over 1 billion.
That's crazy.
And every year, the sort of equivalent of a Super Bowl, which is the Champions League, which is all the best teams in Europe, and they have a final, much like the Super Bowl. And again, the audience is way over 1 billion. So people in the US don't tend, obviously lots of other countries from your 52 will be aware of this, but in the US, they tend to think the Super Bowl is a big deal. So I sometimes put them right.
I watch the Super Bowl maybe every 3 years. It's on too late on a Sunday night. I don't stay up that late. So I'm not one of their 150 million viewers normally. I did watch it this year. I fell asleep before it ended, but I did watch it, most of it this year. So
yeah. I actually, when I came here, I made a point of, because when you're talking to business owners and so on, sport is one of those things that people talk about. So I did make a point of sort of getting to understand American football, baseball, basketball, and so on. And then my youngest son, who at the time was about 11, of course, he got big into the Patriots. Mm-hmm. So, of course, the Patriots were in the Super Bowl a lot. So I did watch quite a few in the first few years. Not so much now. I think the Patriots era is done. But, I enjoy all sports, so...
we were big, my son Dawson and I, Paul, were huge Patriots fans. Really, we were more Tom Brady fans. Dawson, we had a friend who was good friends with Bill Belichick, and she would get Dawson all kinds of jerseys and gloves that were played, just cleats from the Patriots after the game. That some of the players would give them their jersey or their gloves they wore or their cleats. He's got more Patriots paraphernalia than anybody I know. And it's really cool, man.
Tom Brady, obviously football and sport is sort of divisive in who people like and who people don't like, and so on. But I used to say to my son, just make sure you watch Tom Brady, because you won't see many of those in a lifetime. You won't.
The dedication and work ethic he has in this. I just heard today, I'm not going to get into this, but I heard that he and his wife might be getting back together.
Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, that's good.
I'd like to see that. He retired, so now...
Finally, he's got around to retiring. Concentrate on his family a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's time, yeah. All right, so Paul, we'll get into this now. And I'm going to ask one question, and then we're just going to go. And this is a question I ask everybody, but I usually phrase it differently. So I'm going to ask you, what inspired you first to become an accountant? And then from there, you've just continued to create these amazing business ventures and continuing to do this to this day and in the future. So what inspired that? Let's start with there and just tell us your story.
Yeah, no, it always makes me smile, actually. What you actually normally see are these fairly successful entrepreneurs, let's just say, who, when they're giving advice to young people, they say something like, just follow your passion. And I always giggle when I hear those stories, because I'm thinking, well, I definitely didn't. Little bit of background, I'd gone to college. That was, I'd mentioned my family. That in a way, that college period between 18 and 21 sort of basically allowed me to see who I was. But, this is maybe a little bit of my background. I was very into punk rock. Sex Pistols, Clash, Ramones, people like that, sort of anarchic. And by the way, that definitely is a little bit of me. But and I've already mentioned the story. My first wife. What happened was, we got together. She was going to do a postgrad.
Hey, Paul,
degree.
Can I interrupt you for a minute? There's a little bit of ticking on the phone, like a little bit of rubbing or something. I don't know if that's something you're aware of. No, it's stopped now.
Is that better?
Yep, a lot better. Yeah.
Yep. So we got together, my first wife, and at university we were, at this point we were engaged. I told the story about the parents, and she was doing a postgrad degree after college in Manchester, and sort of geography. It was about 200 miles away from her parents, 150 from mine or so, and essentially, we decided we're going to live together, and I was going to follow her up to Manchester. And this tells you how naive I was, because I didn't have a job and I didn't have anywhere to live. And we just decided to go to Manchester and sort of basically live together. And even to this day, I look back and think, what were my parents doing letting me do that? But basically, I have this sort of mental image. We got on a train, and I had a rucksack, and basically we had nowhere to live, and we had no job, and went up to Manchester, and we had this very, very loose arrangement where, in fact, it was my girlfriend's friend, and she said, you can sleep on the floor of my apartment, for about a week, and try and find somewhere. And so that week, we were trying to find an apartment, and the bottom line was it really didn't go very well. It's sort of how naive I was to think that you could rent an apartment without a job. I had a little bit of money, but no job. And there's lots of stories, actually, of how that apartment search didn't go great. But the sort of, if you like, the depths of it was where there was a big house, one of those houses that's been broken into lots of apartments. And then outside was a basement. And you sort of went down some steps. And in this basement was just a basement. And it didn't have a bathroom. If you wanted to go to the bathroom, you had to go around the house and back inside and up the stairs. And we were desperate by this point. So I said, we'll have it. and then the guy looking at me said, are you married? And I said, no, but we're engaged. And he said, I'll think about it. And we went back the next day and he said, I've thought about it. I'm not having unmarried people in my basement. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, wow. We can't get much lower than this, where you're rejected from living in a basement. But right at the end of the week, before we had to go home, we happened to go to another place. And sort of as an aside, this was a gay couple, which was pretty rare in 1980. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe partly because they'd had some tough times. But basically they said, tell you what, we'll give you a chance. You can have this apartment for 1 month, but by the end of 1 month, you have to have a job. So step one was we'd managed to get this very loose toehold onto an apartment. So that was the start. Shall I go straight into where that then went next, Brian?
Yeah. I'm just taking notes.
Yeah. So I thought, so I then had this period of time, and somewhere in that month, my best bet was actually a marketing company. It was quite a big marketing company. And for some reason, I was actually travelling from my parents' house. So it was actually quite difficult to get to. I had to get trains, 2 buses, chapter of incidents in this journey. I mean, the one I remember was, I was struggling for time. And I remember them saying at the bus station, you get this bus to the first town, and then let's say you get a number 10 to the place where you're going. But you're really tight on time. So I remember I'd got to this town, and I looked ahead, and I could see the bus I was meant to get on was about 200 yards ahead. And I thought, oh gosh, I've missed it. But the traffic in the main street was really slow. So I got off at the bus stop. I'm wearing a suit and a tie. I think it was July, so it was hot. And I sprinted up the high street and basically got to the next bus stop before the bus in front. And jumped on this bus thinking, great, I've made it. At which point the bus driver looks at me incredulous. I think partly because I was wearing a suit. This was 1980s England. It was pretty depressed economically. So I'm not sure we saw many people in the suit and tie. But then he says, what are you doing? And I said, I'm getting the number 10 bus to Risley, I think it was. And he said, well, we're just going back to the terminus. We haven't left yet. So, but you can sort of tell from it that I've been on this long journey. It's a hot day. I'm running up the high street. I'm sweating. I eventually made the interview. And I made it just about on time. So it can be, I think 6 to 7 hours to get there. But then, you get into the interview. And as I said, it's a really hot day. And the guy who was interviewing me decided he would sort of give me 5 or 10 minutes about how great this could be. Now, he didn't do this deliberately, but he was right next to a window. The sun was beaming in. Behind him was this glossy sort of white wall. And he's talking to, what a great company this is. But I have really sensitive eyes to sunlight. And I found myself, my eyes were watering, which eventually turned into tears trickling down my cheeks. And he's telling me how great this company is, and I'm crying. And he thought I better say something. And the words that came out of my mouth were, I'm sorry I'm crying. It's the bright white wall. He looked at me like I was crazed, What's he doing? And I think in America you call it the bum's rush. And so basically, I can't remember how long I was then left in that interview. It might have been 10 minutes. But basically, I was given the bum's rush and I was out. And then I had to get all the way back. It took me another 6 to get back to my parents. And on review of the day, I'd spent about 14 hours travelling and then cried in the interview. So this sort of wasn't a great part. And we're now about I think more than halfway through my month. Does that all, did that all make sense?
Oh, yeah. I remember you telling me this story a few weeks ago about the crying in the interview. Yeah, it's interesting. I want to maybe I can even stop right now, take a break and share with the audience. I want you to think about this. And I love what Paul said earlier. And three basic or 4 words: a train, a rucksack, and no job. I mean, you think about that for so many of us out there where we are looking at where we are in life right now. And maybe you're just not happy with where you are. You feel like, you're stuck. Like I always say in the beginning intro talks about, you're stuck on the hamster wheel of life. There's nothing more stuck than being on a train with a rucksack and no job, and then getting deterred from a basement apartment that doesn't even have a bathroom, then taking a 6-hour bus ride to a job where you get the bum rush because you're crying in the interview because the sunlight, you're sweating and crying because of the bright sunlight. I mean, we've all been there in those moments, and so often we tend to collapse at those moments where we say, we're not meant for this, we're not meant for success, we're not meant to continue on. Well, as Paul continues with his story, you will see that we've all been there. Some of you are there right now. You're on that train with no job and a rucksack, so to speak. Or if you're not now, you have been or will be sometime in the future potentially. And it's listening to Paul's journey and his experience and wisdom should actually be that impetus that says, no, I can do it too. So I'll let you continue on, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Give me a chance to draw breath. So as I'm more than halfway through my month, and I think basically I know we'd got to about 3 days to go, but somewhere before the 3 days, there was a recruitment firm that was helping me find, places. And this guy phoned me up and he said, I've got this firm. They've been looking for someone like you all summer, because I had a good degree. I had basically a good grade of a degree. They've been looking for someone like you all summer. You fit the bill. And this is what the guy said to me. He said, basically, turn up for the interview, be confident, don't cry. So I got early. Having learned from my lesson from jumping on buses and running up high streets and goodness knows what, I got there early and I went to a bookstore because I had no idea about accountancy. So I don't know what being a bookstore, Barnes and Noble or something like that, but UK time it was W.H. Smith's, a big bookstore. I went to one of these bookstores and found a book about accountancy, and I was that was my preparation for this. So when you talk about inspiration, it sort of makes me smile a little bit, because I didn't have a clue, and I certainly didn't have a clue that there was a lot of exams. But what I remembered, just go in there, be confident, don't cry. So I got into the interview, and funnily enough, this guy, whose name was Keith, I ended up being a partner of his many years later. He was interviewing me. I sort of had something of an obsession about the exam failure rate, which honestly I had no clue about. And I subsequently came to find that was true. Anyone going in, the way it works in England is you don't do accountancy at college, but you do, when you join somewhere, you spend 3 years training and you do a number of exams, and they're all really bright people, and less than 50% pass, because it's very tough, actually. But anyway, he was saying to me things like, so what about the exam failure rate? And I didn't even know there were any exams, so I just said, but I remember, be confident. So I just said, well, if you look at my resume, you'll see I've taken a lot of exams in my life, and I've never failed one yet. Don't intend to start now. And I could, from his body language, that he liked that sort of style of bullish answer. So I just carried on. And the only other one I remember as a question was, he said, I see you with your girlfriend. Is that going to cause you distraction, basically, from your exams? And I said, well, she's going to be doing exams. I'm going to be doing exams. I'm really competitive. So I can tell you now that I will want to do better in my exams than she does in hers. And he loved that, And you could see the more I went into this ludicrously overconfident answering, the more he liked it. So the interview carried on in this vein with me, being more and more and more confident. The interview went well. At the end of the interview, he said, that was great. He said, actually, the vacancy was filled yesterday. There is no job. But you have interviewed so well. I'm going to create an extra job for you. Start Monday. And that was my inspiration.
So you got the job in time before the end of the month was up for the apartment.
I did. I think from memory, it was 3 days before.
Wow.
The job. This was the last chance, really. But at the end of the interview, it said the vacancy I thought I was going for had been filled. But because I'd gone into this ridiculous, really, bravado, he liked it. He was that sort of character that liked that sort of answer. And so, almost by accident, because I'd cried, I went into this OTT mode. And he said, on the basis of that, I'm going to create an extra job for you. Start Monday. And so it's sort of like a group sliding doors moment. Mm-hmm. There was certainly no passion involved, certainly no inspiration. It was just I needed to pay the rent. Right? At the last interview, so that in a way created the character I presented on that particular day.
Well, you went in, you were confident, and you didn't cry.
Exactly. That's part of my sort of, you want morals for life. Be confident, don't cry. My sort of, I then had a plan. I mean, my parents were delighted because, of course, accountancy is a really respectable and solid job. So apart from me paying the rent, they were also happy that I was doing something that they deemed pretty respectable. I had no intention of doing that long term. Apart from the salary was terrible. I mean, pre-qualification as an accountant, certainly in those days, you weren't paid well, so that wasn't good. So I think I decided, I'll get part qualified, maybe change career, but for the meantime, it's fine. But somewhere along the way, I think in the first year, 18 months, I actually realised I was pretty good at this. And see, first of all, with accountancy, I sort of had this image that you had to be really good at math, which I passed my sort of basic exams in math, but I wasn't any sort of rock star when it came to math. But, you really don't have to be very good at math to be an accountant. But what I had, I think, which I still have to this day, was what I'd say an instinct for accounts. Sort of I can look at a set of...
Folks, I think we lost Paul here for a moment, so we're going to wait for him to call back in. And hope that will happen soon enough. There we are, Paul. We lost you for a moment.
I hope you're going to be able to deal with that little break.
Oh yeah, right? Yeah. We'll splice that right out of here.
Where did you get up to, or where did I get up to when I?
It was right. Well, you were wrapping it. You had wrapped up your story, and I didn't realize you were off. I thought you were taking a break. So for a minute before I paid attention, so I don't really know where we left out. I think you had said, I know you had said you realized in the first 12 to 18 months that you were pretty good at it. And you thought you'd have to be good at math.
Exactly.
Yeah, wizard at math.
So shall I pick up from there?
Yeah, go right from there.
Yeah. So, I realized after 12 or 18 months that I was pretty good at this. And part of it was I felt like I had a natural instinct for looking at a set of accounts and sort of like a water diviner could tell when they were wrong or right or whatever, particularly looking at a balance sheet. And, even to this day, I can do that. People used to be amazed sometimes that they'd be working on something for a week maybe, and I would look at it for 2 minutes and say, that's wrong. So I'm not sure how I do it, but I definitely have an instinct for looking at the accounts, which is obviously fairly important to be an accountant. But I think the other thing was I was good at talking to clients and making them comfortable. And I've always had this thing where, I talk to people how they, in the sense of, I sort of mirror them, I guess. But I learned, we were dealing with all sorts of clients from all sorts of backgrounds. And I was pretty good at it. I remember one story. We went off to a place where we happened to stay away, me and my manager. And we were with this quite big client, certainly for us at the time. And his name was Roy. And Roy was a really earthy character, sort of, earthy. Yeah, he liked women. He liked what men looked to me. And I remember he invited us to a dinner at his house, just him. And somewhere in this sort of dinner, he was talking about something. And don't ask me what possessed me to say this, but I remember telling him the Swedish phrase for a particular sexual position. And we talked about this for a while. He then went out to the restroom or wherever. My manager was, you can't say that to a client. I'm like, well, he seems to like it. But in a way, that was sort of a microcosm of even intention of doing this long term. There were a couple of things along the way. One, I seemed to be pretty good at it. Two, I seemed to, sort of have this knack of talking to people. So from thinking I would probably leave before getting qualified, I sort of changed that and said, okay, I'm going to do these 3 years, get qualified, and then leave and do something else. So I'll sort of pause there and let you ask me anything if you want to, Brian, at this stage.
I think what everybody wants to know right now, I think a lot of people grab their pen and paper and want to know what that sexual position is. So the finished position, they want to know the term for that.
Well, I can remember it, but I'm not sure it's a good one for me to repeat.
Well,
it was a Swedish phrase that, let's just say, I learned along the way.
I've got some Swedish friends, so I'll have to ask them if they know of any cool terms. I liked what you said earlier, and you mentioned this to me 2 weeks ago, Paul, when we talked, is those sliding door moments. And you became this accidental accountant, and I think so many of us we try to plan our lives. And you said, follow your purpose. They always laugh when people say that. So many people try to plan their lives out. And I think that sometimes you have to just go, you have to let life happen. You have to go for what you want to go for, but you have to accept those sliding door moments where things are going to take you in different directions that you can't predict or project. I mean, life is chaotic. People think that cause and effect is this linear, I go from A to B and it's a straight line. It's so complex and dynamic, and there are twists and turns. And I think so often we fight those twists and turns, and it really causes a lot of stress. And when we do that, we lose these opportunities that are right there around the corner. And I think it's just good that you're like, I didn't know anything about accounting. You went to a bookstore before the interview to learn a little bit about it. I mean, come on. I'll do it for a year or two, and then I'll move on to something else. And I think, obviously, had you not taken that position, the HaydenRock Solutions, I mean, all these companies that you've started, you've sold, you've gone public with, they wouldn't exist.
Or it'd be very different.
Or
exactly.
They'd be very different, yeah.
And I think we're all shaped by our own background, and my background is of that slide. I mean, that moment is the pivotal moment in my life, because if I hadn't cried in that interview, if I hadn't turned up for that interview randomly and been much more confident than I normally am, I wouldn't have got that job, because there wasn't a job that existed. And if I hadn't have then suddenly realised, I'm actually pretty good at this. And by the way, I'm a bit unusual for an accountant, because most of these, without being too sort of rude, on the whole, accountants are quite good at the numbers, but not necessarily so good with the people. And I was sort of pretty good with the people. And so, that let me reassess. But, I mean, just go back with a little but. Remember I mentioned about being a bit of a punk rocker at college. So what really happened over this 3 years, ultimately I did pass those exams, by the way, and passed them all first time. But somewhere just before, I think it was the Christmas, before the final exams in May, and I went to the Christmas party, and I basically did what, in retrospect, was a pretty daring thing to do. Because, you see, I thought I was going to pass, but I could also see an opportunity for where I could sort of go within this accounting firm. But anyway, we went to the Christmas party, and I knew the same guy who interviewed me, called Keith, I knew at some stage he would wander over and, just ask me how it was going. So I was sort of prepared for this. And anyway, he said, how's it going? I said, great. He said, exams coming up, confident? I said, yep. Still not failed in the exams, and still don't intend to start now. And he said, well, we've got ideas for you in the future. And I said, well, I'll be leaving. Which, he was pretty staggered, because I think by this point, you see, I'd made a pretty good impression. And I was definitely earmarked. But I said, I will be leaving. And he said, why? And I said, well, at that time, we had lots of little offices. And I had an immediate boss who was really good, by the way, very experienced, but not technically qualified. And I said to him, well, this guy's a great bloke. Love him, but there's no way I'm going to go through all these exams and then, be reporting to someone who's not qualified. It's no reflection on him, but I can't do that. So to make life easy, I'm just going to leave. And I sort of did it deliberately. And I can still remember in my mind's eye today watching as 2 or 3 or 4 partners were, chatting over drinks. And eventually he came back and said, we've got a plan for you, but you have to pass your exams. So in a way, it's sort of that, what I call a slight anarchic streak of, I don't care what happens, but I'm just going to ripple the water a little bit, which is what I did. And the output of that was good news, big opportunity opened up. Not so much bad news, but pressure news. You better pass those exams. And that was probably the next little step.
So
if you want to come.
So that with what was the name of the firm?
That was called Crossley and Davis.
That is Crossley and Davis. Okay, but
So I was I was sort of 2.5 years into my 3 years of training.
Okay.
I had my exam coming up, and by the way, only 50% of people, less than 50% passed first time. So it was a dangerous thing to put myself on the spot like that.
So obviously you didn't leave.
No, well, what happened was I did. He basically came to me and said, "Okay, we're going to create a new department for you. You're going to lead it up. You better pass." I still didn't stop doing crazy things. In fact, in just before the exams, we had about 6 weeks of sort of training time, basically. And I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I dyed my hair orange. And through that 6 weeks, I think it was maybe with 2 weeks to go. And I sort of assumed it was one of those things where it would wash out, but it didn't. It wouldn't. And to make it even worse, I was getting married 1 week after the exams finished. So first of all, I turned back up at work with my hair orange, which wasn't the best thing to have done when I was being given this opportunity. And then I remember turning up for the wedding, and my dad, by this stage it was about 3 weeks after I'd done it. So if you can imagine, I had a great big orange stripe around my head, and I remember my dad saying to me, "You look like a badger." So I'm trying to paint a picture of a sort of anarchic guy who was pretty good at the job, but I really wasn't the typical accountant. So anyway, carrying on. I took that opportunity. I made it happen. I became a partner then at a really young age because I did qualify. You then have to wait 3 more years to get it. So 6 years after starting is sort of the earliest you can become a partner. And that's what happened to me in 86. I became a partner. And basically I really, really went for it. And I guess the next sort of pivotal thing was, when I say went for it, I lost work-life balance. I definitely, was far too work-orientated and not enough personal life. And that culminated in a divorce about 10 years later.
Okay. Well, Paul, you had mentioned something, and I don't know if I don't want to jump the gun on this, but you had mentioned something when we talked a couple of weeks ago, you had a 3-month vortex of intense work. Was that during that time, or was that another point?
Well, actually, no, that period was more like a 10-year vortex of hard work. The 3 months you're referring to is a little more recently. If you don't mind, I'll maybe save that. Towards the end.
No, please do.
But you're right insofar that I have a little history, which I now manage better than I did, of losing work-life balance. And definitely between about 86 when I became a partner, 97 when I got divorced, I definitely lost work-life balance. And you could argue it sort of had to, because I was relatively young and growing firm, and lots of things had happened in the middle of all that. But I did get divorced, and I'm one of these people. I'm not trying for a second here to claim big depression or anything, but I'm fairly robust as a character. I don't tend to get too depressed, but I definitely was at this point of divorce. And I just think I felt the need to talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. And normally I think I'd have talked to friends, but most of my friends were also friends with my ex-wife. So I think I decided, I don't want to burden friends being in the middle of a divorce. Right. So for whatever reason, it's certainly a strange, when I say a strange thing, it's not a strange thing, but an unusual thing for me to do was go and see a counsellor type person, someone to talk to. Yeah. And so I set this up. And I think I set it up for 6 p.m. or something. And I'd been out that afternoon, maybe 100 miles away at a client. So I had a fairly long journey. And coming back, I'm thinking, okay, they're going to ask me questions. I'll, sort of prepare my answer, if you like, of how I've got to this position. And, in my mind, I went through all the stages. And it obviously wasn't done by PowerPoint, but it was a little bit PowerPoint. It was a bit like a business presentation. So I sat down with this counsellor, went through that story, starting with the rucksack, and on the train, no job, no home, sliding doors. 17 years later, here I was. And anyway, I went through my sort of background, and this lady who was really good, she listened and listened and listened. And then she said, interesting. Compare and contrast the guy who got on the train with the rucksack without a care in the world 17 years ago to the person who's just turned up in my office and was given what I can only describe as a business presentation. Might as well have been on PowerPoint. Do you think that somewhere along the way you might have lost yourself and who you really are? And that was, to me anyway, a great insight, really, that one sentence summed up. There you were, on the train with a rucksack, random. You're so work-driven that you basically gave a business presentation on your divorce. I think that's sort of interesting. Again, I'll let you comment, Brian.
So I love that question because I think, there's a couple of things I want to ask you really quickly. Number one, I want to go back to the work-life balance and the vortex of intense work. Do you think that's necessary? And this is a question, I get a lot of this from my clients, and I work with clients on work-life balance. I don't like to use the word balance. I like to use the word blend because I think our lives, when done well, they kind of blend together like a good stew with different ingredients. Yes. But do you think it's necessary to achieve high success, to have those, like in this case, a 10-year vortex of intense work, or can you do it in shorter spurts? And what do you think is better?
Well, it's definitely better to do it in shorter spurts. And I think part of this is stages of life. So when I was doing the 10-year thing, first of all, I'm slightly exaggerating for the purposes of the story, because obviously I did come up for air occasionally in that 10-year period. But nonetheless, my focus was on success of my accounting firm. Because by this stage, I was a partner. I'd bought in. I was becoming a more senior partner, and we ended up doing a buyout of the original partners. So that was a focus. And what I've more subsequently learned is you can achieve that blend in shorter phases. So, you referenced something that we were talking about recently. Actually, when I was, this is very recent, in the period between October and December 22, I did go into one of those vortexes for 3 months. But I'm mature enough now to know I'm doing it. And in fact, I remember saying to my partner, her name's Marina. We've been going out together for about 4 years. And as I went into it, I said, I've got to do this thing. It will be done by Christmas, but I am going to go into this intense period. And, she subsequently said, I've never seen that part of you where you just focused on making something happen. But then the other side of that is I've deliberately, in this first 3 months of 23, done the opposite, where if anything, I've gone much more personal focus, partly to make up for that. Mm-hmm. So I think what I've learned is you do need to achieve a blend. You can't always make it perfect, but you can recognize it better. And I think I control it way better now than certainly I did between 86 and 97.
I when you were telling your story, I was trying to think back, and I remember, Paul, this was back in probably 92 or 93. I was dating a woman that I really cared for. In fact, we're still friends today. But we broke up because she told me, Brian, you want to go out there and change the world, and you want to put your entire life into your career. I just want to stay home and have a family. And we broke up amicably, and we're still Facebook friends today, and that's it. But I still talk to her on occasion on Facebook. And it broke my heart, but I remember thinking that she nailed it, because that's exactly what I wanted to do. And then when you were talking, I thought, when did I start coming into the realization that I was in a vortex? And it was probably, I would say 8 to 10 years myself, where, it was nothing but work. I had my daughter at the time. So when she was home, obviously, or with me, I spent a great deal of time with her. But when she wasn't with me, it was go, 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 traveling. I was telling my family, my daughter this weekend, I remember so many times I would sleep at airports because, and I would crawl into those little, like the jungle gym play areas for kids, because they always had padded floors, and I'd crawl into the fort at like midnight and sleep in there. And then I'd set my, have an alarm. I think I had a little travel alarm I carried with, or I would hear the commotion in the morning of the airport waking up, and I'd get up and catch my flight. And it was just a constant for years and years and years. Airports, taxi cabs, hotels, rental cars. And I mean, I wouldn't want to do that today. Not for 10 years.
No, absolutely not. And I recognize what you're saying there. And I think, you see, well, let me preface this by saying, that divorce I had in 97, at the time, in much the same way as you've just described, what I wanted and what my ex-wife wanted were different. Today, we're really good friends again, by the way. But that thing that happened in 97 was really good for me, because, number one, it made me think about it. So hence going to that lady who said, compare and contrast the guy on the rucksack, on the train with the rucksack, and the guy giving the PowerPoint presentation. But probably more importantly, it made me really focus on my kids, because at this point I had 2 daughters, and they were sort of 10, 12-ish. And of course I saw them all the time when I was at home with my ex-wife. But when I say I saw them, I was sort of in the same room, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yep.
Whereas when you are separated, you obviously then carve out proper time for them. So I would see them every weekend. I would see alternately one of them every Thursday night, and they became special nights, Thursday nights. And we would watch Friends. So that's when it was on. And, so watching those Friends together, even to this day, is like a big thing for my daughters, who are now grown up. And, but that was good for me, because it sort of made me carve out that time, which was really good for my relationship with my kids. But probably sort of, not more importantly, but as sort of similarly importantly, it made me really think about the blend. And to this day, we're now 26 years later, that striving for the blend is my biggest thing. I'm always striving for the blend. And occasionally, like the one I referenced, late 22, I do know I have to slip into overdrive. But I also know I'll deliberately get out of it again on the other side. So I'm better at popping in and popping out rather than being sucked right down into it.
Yeah. There are times, I remember Friends, Paul, because when I was a financial advisor, Thursday nights was always the best night to cold call prospects, because everybody was home watching Friends or Cheers, or I think Seinfeld was on back then. Everybody was home on Thursday night. So it was a great time to cold call people at home. You irritate people, but you'd get 1 out of 10 who would say, yeah, I'll talk to you. So that's how we took advantage of Thursday.
And I can still remember to this. I have a ridiculous memory about some things, and one of them is lines from Friends. I do know a lot of them. So, but by the by, and the other thing through this period, this is that sort of 86 to 97 through to 2001 when we sold the business. These sort of happened in parallel. But I think there were also, while I was in that vortex, really, and I think 3 things that were really important in my entrepreneurial career. One was don't be a servant. The other one, or the next one, was don't be backward looking. And the third one was I don't believe in niches. So I can go into those a little bit if you want me to.
Yes, please do.
So, the first one was probably the most important. Funnily enough, I've referenced it today in a working situation where I was saying sometimes you just have to tell people what they don't particularly want to hear. And so this happened in 89, and you talked about me being big into soccer. I know exactly when it was because it was the same day Arsenal played Liverpool in a very famous game in May 1989 to decide the league. But by the by, at the same time, my biggest client was a guy called Ron. And Ron was a really successful business owner. He was actually the most profitable mushroom grower in the UK. And I learned a lot from Ron. He ran a really good business. I learned a ton. However, Ron was a bully. When I say was a bully, he knew I was his biggest client, and sort of he put pressure on me to jump, and he would think, there's this particular night, he phoned me up at dawn 10 p.m. I don't know what it was exactly, but it was after 10, which is an unacceptable time to be ringing someone up, especially about a really mundane business matter. This wasn't urgent. This was minor. And he rang me up, and I was really stressed by this because he was my biggest client. And, I had partners, and I let that pressure get to me. And I had a migraine for the only time in my life that day. And I remember thinking about it sort of a day later when the migraine had abated. And I thought, what are you doing? Because you're doing your best. And I know he's your best client, but you can only do your best. And, you talked about upbringing. And my mother really only gave me one piece of advice, which I can remember, which was, you can only ever do your best. And I thought, well, I'm doing my best. And I am pretty good at being an accountant. And although I'm worried about losing this client, because what will my partners say? Would they do any better with this difficult client? I don't think they would. And so I resolved not to be a servant and sort of say, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir, but to become more like a partner to the client. And that mental state of being their partner in helping them grow their business is a much more positive one than being their servant. And that was my first big lesson. I'll let you jump in on that one.
Well, what you shared with me a couple of weeks ago, that really makes a lot of sense. And I tell my clients the same thing is, we do sometimes, a lot of people, especially in the professional service industry, they tend to look at themselves as servants to their clients
Yes.
versus partners. And I think there's such an empowerment, especially younger people, coming into the industry, they're insecure, they're not experienced yet, they don't quite have the street wisdom yet. And when you set that relationship up with a client, it's very difficult to break it down the road. You almost have to establish that day one that, I would like your business. I don't need your business. I want your business because I want to serve you in a way as a partner. It's not serve you as a servant. And I think there's a lot of power to that. And a lot of people can use, not even just in business, but in life itself.
I agree. And you're quite right, by the way, Brian, in separating existing client from new client. So new client, it's easy.
Yep.
I actually used to interview the client as much as they interviewed me. And in fact, there was one question I used to ask, which is, how strong is your desire to grow your business? And if they ever answered that question less than 9 out of 10, I used to say, thanks, but I'm not interested, because if you can't be bothered, I certainly can't be bothered to work with you or to try and help you. But more to the point that the existing ones, it's harder. But, definitely with Ron, you don't achieve it overnight. But bit by bit, I got into what I used to call sort of reality. One of my colleagues was called Simon, and we used to joke about what I called the mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. And in a way, this Ron was obsessed with being the richest of them all. But bit by bit, I was sort of putting him right and talking about the things he could do better. So it was good, but it wasn't perfect. We can improve. And the more I did that, the more I pushed back a little bit, the more he respected me as an advisor. And so I sort of learned, it's to this day, and I go back to the punk anarchic thing. See, I call this my I don't care mentality. And sometimes people misinterpret that because they think I don't care, well, which is not true. I do care a lot, but I am my best when I'm not too I'm not trying to say what they think. I'm not trying to say what I think they want to hear. I'm prepared to tell them their baby's ugly, if you like. And that mindset, I'm not going to be a servant, is really key to me. If I don't think something's right, I say it.
Well, I was just listening to Joe Rogan yesterday, and he was talking to a evolutionary biologist, and they were talking about, I think they called it atomic immunity. When you feel like you're immune to either being canceled or other people's opinions, you have such an empowered strength, and that is it's so empowering, and your strength is radically increased when you feel that, hey, I have immunity. I'm going to get through no matter what, whether I have this client in my life or I have this person in my life. I'm okay. I'm always going to be okay.
Exactly. And it's that strength of mind that basically says, I'm not going to just bow or scrape to that client. I'm going to tell them what I truly think. And I think it's just a mental attitude. Second pivotal thing, I'm not going to go into in too much detail here, but the whole shift from being what I call a backward-looking accountant. Sorry, Brian, are you there?
Oh, yeah, I got you. We just had a little sound like Star Trek for a minute.
It's the shift from being a backward-looking accountant to being a forward-looking accountant. And the whole thing of you can only add value to the future, you can't add value to the past. So I'm not going to dwell too much there because I talk about it a lot. But that shift from being backward-looking, as accountants typically are, to being forward-looking was huge for Lathams and for me, and to this day, as I help accountants become more forward-looking. And the third thing, which was a big realization, was, I hear people in America a lot, and certainly in the UK as well, think they need a niche. Well, in the US, you say niche, and in the UK, we say niche, but it's the same thing. And on the whole, people follow niches. And I always think it's a really weird thing to do because by definition, a niche is a small slice. So you are sort of reducing your market potential if you follow a niche. And even worse, if you claim to be an expert in something, you'll probably find the client is a bigger expert. So using mushrooms as the example, with Ron, if I claim to have a niche in mushroom growers, Ron knows more about mushrooms than I do. And so I feel like it's a dangerous place to be. And what I used to say, I used to have what I called the back of the business card conversation. Because in those days, we're in a physical room, we'd have a business card. You visualize the size of a business card, it's not very big. And if ever the client said to me, so what do you know about, let's say it was mushrooms in Ron. And I would always, rather than try and pretend I knew a lot, I went the other way and said I knew nothing. And I used to say, I know nothing. In fact, I couldn't even fill the back of that business card with what I know about mushrooms. But I tell you what I do know. I know about growing businesses. You know about mushrooms. I know about growing businesses. Put the two of us together, we'll be a pretty good partnership. And that realization that all businesses, whether they were, my biggest client after Ron, well, Ron was my second biggest eventually. John was my biggest. He was the most profitable jewellery retailer in the UK. Couldn't be any different really. But the business principles are the same. And so what I learned really was don't go into niches. And there are very few things that matter in growing businesses. In fact, I talk about there being 6 key areas of business advice. And really what I was doing was I was boiling it down to very simple stuff to help business owners succeed. So that combination of don't be a servant, always look forward, not backwards, and them grow, don't pretend you're in a niche, were the 3 biggest sort of learning points that lead into how I do it today.
I love that. That niche one is an interesting one because so many people do, and you see a lot of content experts, or subject matter experts, I should say, who will advise you to go into niches. And I never really have for my practice, other than I do a lot of work in the financial world because that's my mothership. I came from the financial world, but I certainly didn't. It wasn't by design. And I have noticed whether I'm working, I've done a lot of coaching in the medical practices or law firms. There's really no difference. I mean, there's some subtle differences, but overall,
I go through 6 steps, and there's subtle differences, but there's 6 little steps. And I won't bore you with all of those. But, in a way, my little favourite one is, there's only 3 ways to grow revenue in any business in the world. You have got 3 components to revenue. It's a composition of the number of customers or clients multiplied by the average number of transactions per client multiplied by the average dollar value of a transaction. And that equals revenue in every business in the world. And the only 3 things you can do to grow revenue are either get new clients, do more things with them, or increase the average value of what you're doing. And in a way, that then focuses the mind of the business owner. And it doesn't matter whether they're building houses, growing mushrooms, selling jewellery. It's the same 3 components. And all you're really doing is focusing the mind of, typically, you use the phrase serial entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are all the same. They're all what I call plate spinners. And they're spinning all these plates madly and frantically. And they do this stuff, and it's all in their head, and they're driving around and they're watching television, and it's all complex. But if you boil it down to simple stuff, you clarify their thinking. And it really doesn't matter what business they're in, the principles are the same.
I like that a lot. I think I just tried. I'm going to write that. I wrote that down, but I also noted that you said that 1 minute, 4 seconds into the podcast, or 1 hour and 4 minutes into the podcast. So I'm going to go back and re-listen to that part again. I think that was powerful. I just couldn't write fast enough. So, okay. Paul, you had mentioned something today earlier when you and I were talking. And I don't. Maybe you don't want to share this. Maybe you're okay with it. Talking about how you have a goal of taking your companies to a certain level, and you're working on I think your 5th one now. Are you okay sharing that?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. And it's just a little internal driver, because I guess this goes back a little bit to the work-life blend. And I realised along the way, you see, that I did need to. Well, it wasn't so much I needed to work too hard, but I wanted to have a blend, because I think I'm best. I operate best as a person when I have that blend. If I was full-time retired, it wouldn't suit me very well.
No, I don't think so.
And so I like having a blend. And, it just so happens, without going into too much details, but this current one with Elite is my 5th business venture. And the previous 4, I've always made at least a 7-figure gain. And so, in some cases, significantly more than that. But nonetheless, I've always made a significant gain. And so my little driver is just to make it a nice round number 5.
Well, then what about number 6 when that's done?
Well, I am beginning to become aware of the creaking bones as I walk down the stairs in the morning and such like. So I'm thinking, I've definitely got time and energy for the 5th. No, what was it, James Bond? Never say never again, or something like that. Yeah. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the 6th. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, you could pull a Tom Brady and retire and come back, and retire and come back.
Yeah, but we know what that did, didn't we? Because it caused a bit of a work-life blend balance for Tom and Giselle.
Yeah, so. He didn't do so well with that one. Have you ever thought, Paul, about putting your stories and your experience down into a book format?
Sort of. I actually have done. I've written it to myself. It's called The Story of the Backward-Looking Accountant, and it is written in my on my PC somewhere. So it's sort of there. And once upon a time, I did think about it, but in a way, it's evolved into what we do at HaydenRock and Elite. So I sort of felt like it slightly got in the way, and it's a little bit too much about me and not enough about what we're trying to do as a business. So it is there, and maybe that might be the 6th thing.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. I think that would be.
I think it is. I mean, certainly I talk to accountants here in the US quite a bit, And they are way behind the rest of the world in this. It's an interesting thing, but it's a consequence of the complexity of the tax planning, or the tax code, I should say, in the US, that the accountant here is compartmentalized and almost forced to be backward looking. But obviously I spend a lot of time talking to accountants here about the opportunity to be forward looking. And they are certainly usually interested. We do have a video, it's about a couple of hours video, on within the elite training, which is called the Latham story. So in a way, I've sort of turned it into that. And these, because I got so bored of telling the story almost, that I thought, let's put it onto a video, and then I don't need to keep saying the same thing over and over again.
Are you soon to be ready for the final question that I'm going to ask you? But before we get there, I just want to share. When you would never think that the world of accounting, which has been your backbone for the past number of decades, has so much life application for the average person. So I think if I would have told somebody, hey, I'm bringing this Paul guy on, his background is accounting, and they'd be like, okay, I'm not going to listen to that podcast. I'll skip that episode. But what you've talked about is all about
by
life.
The way, I never say I'm an accountant at parties.
No. Well,
sorry.
Through Elite, I've met some really cool accountants.
No, agreed.
I really have, and in fact, many of them are friends of mine on Facebook now. After we work together, and I get to see their life, their personal life a lot. But I just think that looking at the journey that you've gone on, and I'm looking for what I try to do, Paul. In the middle of a podcast, I try to think of what's the title going to be, because the title has to completely summarize in just a few words. And I love the trains and rucksacks. I love that to now becoming, as you call it, a highly successful bloke. Is a bloke is that a positive term?
Yeah.
Okay.
A bloke is a term of endearment. It's sort of like mate. Is mate a word in the US?
Yeah. Not used.
It's sort of like an earthy mate.
Okay, all right. We use, obviously, in the US we say buddy or pal sometimes.
Buddy, yeah. It's same sort of word. Bloke has maybe a slightly working classy sort of salt of the earth connotation.
I like that. I'm going to start using that word. I bet I'm going to get a lot of looks up here. They're going to think I'm swinging. I might get punched up here because where I live, they might think I'm saying something derogatory. But I really liked the question that the counselor asked you back in the when you were after your divorce, and I think we could all take that and say we can look back at those moments in our lives when we were really fresh, we were really hungry, we were just maybe the best word, we were naive. Like I remember
definitely naive.
Yeah,
and it's in a funny sort of way. I replicated this because around about 2009, I'd reached that stage of life. My two daughters, who I'd mentioned before, were grown up and gone, and they were doing stuff, and they were around the world, and blah blah blah, living their life. And I had two younger children who were sort of high school age. So I remember saying, shall we just have a change? And to be honest, actually, originally it was going to be Barcelona, because I quite like Barcelona, and I can speak Spanish a little. But then I thought, that whole work-life blend, I'm not sure I could work terribly well in Spanish. So I thought, okay, let's not make it Barcelona, let's make it the US. They sort of speak English, more or less. And I normally say that more or less, and I usually use a little pause, because American people sometimes get the joke. But and basically we moved to the US, and there's quite a story about where I ended up in Rhode Island, as we said at the beginning. But in my mind, what I was really doing was being the young boy on the train with the rucksack, except this time I was on the plane with sort of a Gucci bag. But it was the same mental freedom of, let's give it a go over there.
I think that's perfect right there. From trains and rucksacks to planes and Gucci bags.
Yes. It wasn't really a Gucci bag, but I couldn't quite think of what was the fancy bag I had. It wasn't a Gucci bag, but it was the same, it was one of those. It was an expensive bag on a plane, but mentally, it was the same as the train and the rucksack and the freedom to move.
I think it's so important for us to go back to that moment. I remember when I was 29, when I left American Express Financial Advisors to start my consulting firm. I had nothing but wide eyes, a little bit of arrogance, a lot of insecurity, but a lot of naivety where I thought I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I could do anything. I was 8 feet tall and bulletproof. And,
Yes.
life tends to beat you down at times. And it's good to go back to that fresh version of yourself, become naive, become curious, become driven again. And find that, that purpose in your life or whatever you want to go for, and really go back to your original self to reclaim that youth. And I don't even mean youth as far as an age, but
it's
the
definitely
innocence.
an invigorating thing.
Yeah.
It's a freeing up thing.
It is.
And moving country anyway, it's just an interesting thing. You observe the differences. But it's interesting. But ultimately, I love it here where I live. I feel very blessed to have had the opportunity to do that. But there was definitely a part of me that was trying to recreate the 21-year-old boy on the train with the rucksack.
It's like trains and rucksacks and trains to Gucci bags and planes.
Exactly.
That sounds like a country song.
Exactly. It could be. Could well be.
So, Paul, as we wrap up, we have a little bit. I want to ask this final question because I love the stories you share and the way you phrase and the way you take us through this journey. Where I'm like, I'm on my third page of notes right now. I'm flipping through my notebook. But the final question is, I didn't ask a lot today, but was there a question that you kind of wish I would have asked you, or perhaps is there a final message you want to leave with the Bamboo Pack audience?
Yeah, I thought the final question was going to be the one we just asked. Usually people ask me, why did you move to America? So in a way, I preempted that final question. I think the other one I thought you might have asked was, what's your favourite book that you're reading at the moment?
Let's do that.
You see, what I don't do, I must admit, is read business books. I have done in my life, but I go back to what I was saying a few minutes ago. I like to keep things quite simple, and I've got a structure and I've got a framework, and I like it. But I'm also that punky sort of person. I'm trying to remember what Anton said when you asked him that question. I've got a feeling he talked about Stephen Covey, 7 Habits, which was definitely a good book. Yeah. I think he might have said the book he really liked was Who, Not How.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know whether he said that or not, I know it's one he likes. But you see, because of the sort of OCD in me, I always object to things like that, because I think, well, it's not who, not how. It's who and how. And I know what the premise of that book is, and you get the right people in. It's what Elite do, Virtual Family Office. But you still have to think about how to get those people in front of an audience or in front of the right expert. So that's me to a T in a way. I look at something and I go, no, that's literally not quite correct. It's not who, not how. It's who and how. And so partly, I'm not really answering your question there. So I don't read business books. What I do read are history books.
Okay.
So I'm big into, at the moment I've just finished Julius Caesar, read about Genghis Khan, recently about, what's that guy, Davy Crockett. So I like, what I like here, funnily enough, is reading history that combines with sport. So when I first moved to the US, for example, I was reading about, Lou Gehrig or Jackie Robinson. And in a way that achieves both things. You can, interesting in the sport aspect, but it also tells you a lot about the country you're living in and how it evolved into what it is today. So anyway, long rambling answer there. I like history and sport, not that keen on business books.
So let me ask you, going back to, I didn't ask you the question of why you moved to the U.S., but what do you like best about living here in the United States?
I like the people. Obviously, I don't meet all the people in the US, but I compare and contrast a lot. What I find in the US is a sort of, it's that can-do attitude. It's also very polite. Certainly where I live, people are very polite, very almost oldie-worldy polite. and they have a get up and do sort of attitude. I know if I go walking down the beach this afternoon and I happen to walk by someone on the beach, I know they'll engage me in conversation because that's what people do here. UK, not so much. If you walk past someone on the beach in the UK, they'll think you're a bit weird if you start talking to them. So I think the people are the best part.
Good. I like to hear that. I know you told me when we talked 2 weeks ago that you really do love the U.S.
Yes.
I'm going to ask a question that I know you've already answered this throughout this, but I'd like to. It's a good way to encapsulate. So, because the 21-year-old Paul Latham on the train with the rucksack is such a pivotal moment in your life, if you and I could take a time machine back right now and you could sit and talk with him, what words of wisdom or advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Wow, that's a really deep and meaningful question. Funnily enough, it's use the time machine. I mean, changing the subject slightly to give myself time to think. When I moved to the US, I always, when I talk to accountants, I say there are 3 reasons you should listen to me. 1, I am an accountant, so I empathise with you. 2, I've owned businesses, so I empathise with your clients. And 3, I have a time machine and I know what's coming. But you're now doing the reverse to me, where you're asking me, looking backwards. I think, I mean, it would be obtuse, really, not to continue the theme of today, which is, don't be too worried about what you're doing at a moment in time. Go back to what my mum said many, many years ago. Do your best. Let life present its opportunities. I mean, the reality is, you go back to that. Pivotal moments, but I've had a few pivotal moments. The one was there. The other one was when I went into the partner at the Christmas party and put myself on the line. The one where I learned to, stand up to the client and not be their servant. The one where I realised to become forward-looking. The one where we decided to sell the business. We haven't talked about it, but big moment. Going into other businesses, the decision to move here. Now, the reality is, if we'd have gone back 40 odd years, we couldn't have predicted any of those things. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'd have predicted any of those things. So I don't think there's too much benefit in trying to, personally don't think there's too much benefit in trying to plan your life more than maybe a year or 2 ahead. Mm-hmm. I think planning a little bit ahead is good, but trying to map out your life, never in my wildest dreams would I have thought I've had 5 businesses, moved countries, etc., etc. So why waste the time worrying about it? Just get on with what you're doing, look for the opportunities, plan ahead certainly, go for it, keep your work-life blend.
Okay, can you repeat that? You probably can't. I'm trying to write those down. I'm going to come back and listen to it, because what I want to do now is I want to talk directly to the audience member out there right now and think about what Paul just said, and I love this question because I think it encapsulates so much wisdom for all of us. And I think we can all go back and actually say, what would we tell our former 21-year-old selves, or 18 or 25, whatever, wherever that pivotal moment was in your life. But don't be too worried about, anything but doing your best. Just do your best. Let life present opportunities, because they're going to take advantage of those pivotal moments. Plan your life, a little bit out, 1 or 2 years out, but get on with it. Do your best. Take advantage of the opportunities that come your way, and make sure your life has a good blend. I mean, I think that right there can summarize so much of what you talked about in the wisdom you shared today.
And I think just for me as well, my sort of what I call my punky anarchic self. So sometimes stirring the pot is also quite a good thing to do. Sometimes it's the time to stir the pot and change things up.
Well, when I asked you if you would send me a headshot, a professional headshot, I really wish you would have sent me the one with the orange hair.
Yeah, I'll try and dig it out for you, Brian.
And I don't have to share it, but with the audience. But I would love to see that picture.
Yeah, I will dig it out. I know it's somewhere deep in an old photo album. So I will dig it out.
I will not sneak it on the podcast. I promise you. I'll have hey, so Paul, I'll include in the show notes a link to the Elite Resource team too. Is there any other links you'd like me to share? Anything else you want to promote while you're on here? Because you've got a large audience, and you've given such a great bunch of stories here that are packed with wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, Elite Resource Team is the place to go. Ultimately, these days, I really help accountants, in particular, accountants and financial advisors. But because of my background, I tend to help their accountant partners to reposition and to become more forward-looking and to become more holistic and so on to their clients. So, if you're one of those people, then if you go through Elite, then I'm sure we can help you.
And we do have, I'm sure we have a lot of accountants, but I know we have a lot of people in the financial industry, financial advisors, executives, and things like that who are tuned in quite, every week. So I'll make sure that link is included.
Yeah, and we definitely help financial advisors to, amongst other things, work better with accountants so that they actually basically increase the scope of their opportunities.
I tried cracking into that world several years ago, man. That is a tough world to crack into as far as, being able to help advisors and CPAs or accountants work together. I had a little, and I shared this with you and Ian and as well as with Anton a couple of years ago. I put together a program that I went around and sold, and it was successful, but it wasn't earth shattering. I actually had to sell it as part of one of my bigger processes and programs that I implemented in companies, and this was kind of a side part, but it was really, really challenging to implement.
I think we've gone through iterations of this. It's definitely challenging, but I wouldn't say we've got it perfect because you've never got things perfect, but we've moved on. I mean, we talked 2 years ago. We've definitely moved on. And I think we know now where to concentrate and help people. And I think it's actually what it really is. It's a mix of getting those people to work together, but also I suppose it goes back to the who or how. But it's getting them to recognise that there's a world of expertise out there that can help them. And there's 2 or 3 little pinch points, and if we can solve those, we can solve most things. Well,
like I told you guys last summer and the summer before, I've seen a lot of these types of programs out there. There's no doubt, and that's why I have so much respect for you guys, you and Elite Resource, because you guys have the best one out there, the best system for sure. And I'd like to see some of the improvements you've made recently, because I liked it back in the day. There obviously there's glitches and everything, but it definitely.
Well, that vortex we talked about from 3 months before Christmas, that was a huge improvement.
Good. Well, I'm glad you're out of the vortex.
Yes, me too.
And I'm assuming Maria's...
My partner Marina is too.
Yeah, so I'm assuming she is. Well, Paul, we're going to wrap up. I think today this was officially maybe the longest podcast episode I've ever done, which is awesome.
Apologies for
being
a bit long-winded. I'm English, a bit long-winded.
I like I told you before we started recording, we're going to go, man. And this is going to be a long podcast. And I actually put aside 2 hours for this one today. So I knew we were going to have a good time, and I wasn't going to stop you. There was not a point where I thought we need to stop. So because the wisdom ran out, it was just turn the next corner, and there's more stuff I could write down. So I appreciate it, Paul. Very, very much.
Good. Many thanks for inviting me on, and to your listeners for tolerating my stories. Thank you.
We're going to get a lot of good feedback on this one, I can tell. So anyway, Mr. Paul Latham, my friend, I'm looking forward to talking to you after we're done recording here. But till then, man, thank you so much for being such an amazing storytelling accountant on the Bamboo Lab podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk to you all in a week. And in the meantime, Bamboo Pack audience, I just want to thank all of you for tuning in each week, for subscribing, rating, for hitting that like button, and for most importantly, for sharing this with 3 individuals. You all know business owners out there, whether they're financial advisors, accountants, or whether they run a mom and pop restaurant. There's wisdom in here that they can all use. Please share it. Get it out there. In the meantime, just know that I respect and appreciate each and every one of you. Get out there this week and strive to be your best, show love and respect to others, and man, live intentionally. Enjoy the journey. Talk to you soon.